You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another episode of Overanalyzing, the series where I take a more in-depth look at the fictional universes which I love. This is a more negative episode of Overanalyzing than I normally do, but I'll be talking about what I consider to be the rise and fall of South Park, because South Park was once one of my favorite shows of all time, and is now generic, normie, mainstream, sometimes outright leftist, other times outright just playing it safe and unwilling to take risks. Very run-of-the-mill, basic bitch, normie, playing it safe tripe that they put out now. And I'll get into that a little more, but I'm going to tell a full story about how I got into South Park and my journey with it, because South Park was one of the greats. It was one of the shows I was really, really into. I actually used to be one of those people who said that there was no bad South Park, but this has been shown to me to be not true. And even when I said that there were bad episodes out, I was just too unwilling to recognize that. There are bad episodes. Now, granted, there are a lot of episodes people say are bad that I just don't agree, but there are some episodes that are outright bad, although they do typically come from later seasons. Now, I will get into the core issue I think that South Park has now a little bit later, but for now I want to take you on the journey of how I got into South Park and why I loved it, and of how I got into South Park, how I came to love it, and just why it was great and why it's not great anymore. So my first introduction to South Park was as a little kid. I would catch glimpses of it on the TV when my older cousins or my uncles were watching it on their TVs. My uncle even had an inflatable Cartman pillow, which he actually did eventually give to me later on, and I don't know what the hell happened to it. It's probably in storage or something, and I don't know if it'll inflate anymore. It wasn't like a very comfortable pillow, it was just an inflatable Cartman head. But I loved it. And I hadn't even watched South Park yet, I just thought it was cool. Then Dozermac, my cousin Sean, would talk to me about South Park occasionally, and he would tell me little bits of information about it. At the time, none of this was really sticking, it was just something I knew he had watched and I was not allowed to. Later on in school, when I met Danny, the two of us would talk about South Park a little bit, and then one day he would convince me to watch it at his house. This, however, would lead to me pussing out, where I would refuse to look at the screen and would just listen to it. And I refused to listen to the vast majority of the episode, even. I waited in the other room until it got to the "You Killed Kenny" scene. It was specifically the episode The Jeffersons. I remember that distinctly, because that was the episode, because Danny told me it was the Michael Jackson episode, and I remember the "I'm not blanket," and then he gets thrown and dies. But yeah, I was too much of a pussy to actually watch it at that time. Later times going over to his house, I would man up and just fucking watch it and stop being such a goody two-shoes. So over the course of time, I would watch it at Danny's house. He had a couple of DVD sets and VHSs. None of them were like full season sets. They were actually just, compilations, Christmas compilations, other themed compilations, things like that. But before I even watched it with him, I think the first time I actually sat down and watched South Park was I recorded South Park on a VHS tape, and this is something I would go on to do for years. You see, I would tape it while my parents weren't home, and then I would rewatch the tape over and over again at night or when they weren't home or things like that. So I remember the first episode I taped the ending to Pink Eye, and then the entirety of Cripple Fight. I remember that very distinctly, and I had that tape and I watched it a lot as a kid. And then obviously, as I said, I would go on to watch it at Danny's, and then I would also start watching Sean's VHSs, because Sean had a few different VHSs of South Park, one of which actually had the second half of the tape taped over, so it had random, news reports and TV commercials. Because if you don't know, if you put a little piece of tape over the square on the VHS, you can tape over existing tapes that are not meant to be recorded on, and that was something that people did a lot when I was growing up. So the second half of the tape didn't actually have South Park on it, so it only had the one episode. It was, the tape, I think it was Volume 9. I think it had Conjoined Fetus Lady on it, but it didn't have the Mexican Staring Frog of Southern Sri Lanka. I think that was the distinction, because the second episode on the tape was taped over. There might have been more episodes on it. I don't remember how many episodes are contained per VHS tape. I'm pretty sure it was 2. I have a few VHS volumes, and now that sounds right. I think it's 2. In fact, I have that volume. I could literally just go look at it, but whatever. We're just gonna go with it. My parents never caught me taping it, which was pretty cool. I did that with The Simpsons, too, because I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons as a kid, either. Yeah, no, my parents were really fucking strict with TV shows. So The Simpsons I would tape all the time, and I had a tape, I think, that had Simpsons and South Park on it that I kept hidden. It was just unlabeled, and we kept it in the VHS cabinet. My parents never really checked that VHS cabinet, because we just had it in the basement. It was just where we would go and watch VHSs. Later on, after the Xbox 360 came out, I would be introduced to the advent of Xbox Video, which would temporarily be renamed Zune Video when Microsoft launched their competitor to the iPod. Now, I believe it was when it was called Zune that I really got into watching South Park, but it could have been before, a little before. I remember I watched it during and maybe a little before, and certainly after. So one thing I did for a very long time was I would watch the trailers to South Park episodes on Xbox Video, because Xbox Video would let you watch a short trailer for each thing. So for a while, I was just watching the trailers for South Park episodes without being able to watch the full episode. Obviously, I still had my VHS tapes and stuff, but this was another layer to add onto it to watch more South Park, because our parents didn't really monitor what we did on the Xbox. They never really watched me when I was in my room playing the Xbox and stuff, so I could get away with it pretty easily. At this point, I was an older kid, entering my teenage years, too, so it was a little ridiculous my parents would even think that they could stop me at that point. One thing that is funny to note, though, before I actually got into Xbox Video that way, when I was a little bit younger, I recorded it on the DVR. I might have been a little older, but not like teen old. I might have been like 10 to 12, somewhere around there. And I recorded an episode of South Park on our Dish DVR, and I renamed it Mucha Lucha, but it only renamed it in the TV room I was in, so my mom came in, and she's like, "Why are you recording South Park?" And I'm like, "I wasn't, it says Mucha Lucha, see?" And then I showed her, and she bought that. She fucking believed that for some reason. She thought it was some glitch with the DVR. But yeah, back to the Xbox Video. Eventually, when I would get Microsoft points, I would start buying episodes periodically. I'd buy a couple episodes here and there, and just kind of watch them at random. I'd also buy South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play, South Park Tenderman's Revenge. South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play is actually how I met Duty, who's a longtime viewer of the channel and a friend of mine that I talk to occasionally, who occasionally also shows up in the comment sections, and I have no doubt is probably watching this video right now. Although right now is subjective, because he could literally be watching it at any point, and it would technically be right now, because he's hearing me say this now, but regardless. I would also go on to be the number 3 player in South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play. The other 2 would be my friends, Duty and South Park. I call him South Park because his gamer tag was literally South Park Let's Go Tower Defense Play, like LGTDP. He was named after the fucking game, so of course he was the number 1 player. And then Duty was the number 2, and I was the number 3, because we always played together, and we would constantly try to outdo our own personal best high scores, and we got to be on the top of the leaderboard for, like, ever. I don't know if those leaderboards are still up, and we've probably been surpassed by now, but for a very long time, we were the cream of the crop, oh yeah! Eventually, my parents would lighten up. I think when I was in either late middle school or early high school, they finally decided I was old enough to make I think it was age 14. I think that's when they said I was old enough to finally make my own decisions. So I think that's when I was finally able to actually start watching South Park without them caring. I remember it was because I watched Futurama, and my mom said, "You're not allowed to watch this, are you?" And I'm like, "No, but come on, I'm 14. She's like, "You know what? Yeah, you're old enough to make your own decisions." And eventually, that was when it finally broke, right? One other thing I neglected to mention is there was actually a time before I was allowed to watch it that I recorded the Jesus vs. Frosty Spirit of Christmas short, the OG first ever South Park piece of media, and I had it on my flip phone, and my mom was like looking through the flip phone on my videos, and I like panicked, took it from her, and deleted it. No, I had both Spirit of Christmases. I deleted one, but she took it back before I could delete the other one, and then I told her I just didn't want her to see that I was watching South Park, and then she was like worried that I was like hiding porn or something, so she's like, "You should have just admitted you had South Park." But yeah, anyway, as it went on, when I was finally told I was old enough to make my own decisions like that, again, ridiculous that it was until 14, but I get it, South Park is a rated TVMA show, so technically she was well within her rights to tell me that, but every kid hides things from their parents. Everyone does. But when I was eventually allowed to watch it, we did eventually get Hulu and Netflix. And South Park was on Netflix first, I believe. And that's where I first watched through it, was on Netflix. But then later on it got moved to Hulu, and then I watched it there. That was the first time I watched through all of it that was out at the time, was on Netflix and Hulu. I can't remember which one I watched through it all first on. I think it was Hulu. Interesting thing with Hulu, there was a cool little glitch you used to be able to do, where if you disconnected your internet after it had loaded the whole episode, you could get the episode ad-free. And this was before they had the ad-free pay option where you pay more. So it was a nice way to cheat Hulu's system and watch the show without having any ads. Doesn't work if you do that anymore. Another way I would watch South Park episodes before I watched through it on Hulu was South Park Studios, which now I think just connects to Hulu, but back in those days was its own separate thing and had all the episodes on it at all times. Until 200 and 201, they didn't have those. But yeah, after having watched it on Hulu, I would eventually go on to buy the DVDs. I originally just bought the season DVDs, but then I found out that the Cult of Cartman was uncut with episodes that were previously not released uncut. And this is before they did the Blu-ray releases, which actually do have the episodes uncut. By uncut, I actually mean uncensored. Uncut and uncensored get kind of used interchangeably, but what I mean is the language track was uncensored. So eventually I did get the, but part of the problem was I misunderstood and thought that it was the Hits collection that actually had the episodes uncut, which was not the case. So I ended up buying that by mistake, but then I decided because I wasn't going to return it. What I wanted to do then was I was going to collect every single South Park DVD and VHS and piece of media ever released. I started doing that, hence why I have my South Park collection videos that you may have seen if you've been watching my channel for a while. And my collection got pretty fucking huge. I have a lot of South Park DVDs. I still don't have quite all of them, but I have a lot. I have every episode from seasons 1 to 23, in most cases multiple times over, and then I started buying the Blu-rays when I found out they were uncensored, so I have seasons 1 through 4 on Blu-ray. I'm still probably going to get season 5 through 12 on Blu-ray because they're remastered, whereas the original versions of those were not. But after that, in all honesty, I'm probably done buying South Park. We'll see if I change my mind, but I don't think I will. I got to be a walking South Park encyclopedia. It got to the point where anyone could ask me any question about South Park, and I'd be able to answer it within a couple of seconds. Anyone could tell me what episode, anyone could give me a quote, and then I could tell them the episode and the season. It was something I prided myself in, having, like, super good knowledge on South Park trivia. I was very, very good at it. Then Season 18 rolled around. And my initial time watching Season 18, I didn't really have a problem with it, but I definitely did notice that there were some episodes that bored me a little bit. I wasn't as conscious of this at the time. It wasn't until the season finale, #rehash and #happy holograms, that I actually started to notice that it was kind of dull. But then when I go back, I realize Season 18 is actually the most boring season of South Park. It's not the worst season of South Park. That would be Season 20, which we'll get to in a minute. But Season 18 is pretty dull. At the time, I actually really liked them experimenting with serialization, and I'm not necessarily against them doing that wholesale, but clearly the way they implemented it didn't work, which is why they toned it down after Season 20, because Season 18 was them testing the waters. It wasn't the first time they toyed with continuity. They did it as early as Season 3. Or you could even argue Season 1 with Cartman's mom is a dirty slut and Cartman's mom is still a dirty slut, but again, discounting two-parters, Season 3, they still had the Meteor Shower three-parter that were completely unconnected. They all just took place on the same night, so you could argue that that was a little different because it was unconnected, but it had continuity. In Season 6, they had continuity as well, with, Kenny trapped in Cartman's body for the whole season. For a lot of the season. But Season 18 was definitely the most that they'd done at the time, and then they did it in Season 19 as well, and I think Season 19 actually did it the best, because Season 19, I think, was the best out of the serialization era, as I call it on South Park. Because I've separated things into eras in a previous video I did. I had the You Killed Kenny era, the revamped era, the serialization era, and the current era. I think that was how I had it. I don't remember. It's been a while since I've done that video. Oh, no, there was also the uncut era, starting with Season 11. This is all my own terms. They're not actual, real things that people say other than me. But it was a good way to divide it out. But the point is, Seasons 18 through 20, I think Season 19 was the best of those three. And then Season 20 came out. And by golly, was Season 20 a steaming pile of horseshit. I remember I was a little bit more lenient on it when it first came out, but I definitely knew at the start that it was my least favorite season of the show, and I would outright call it bad at this point. It's not the worst season now. I actually think the worst season now, out of the ones I've seen, is Season 24, because it's literally just two specials on the same subject. And the laughs are not really there. They play it really safe and play very much with they stick mainly to the establishment narrative. It's just not very fun. There's a couple of laughs to be had here and there in Season 24, but that was ultimately the season that put me off the show. But again, we'll get to those a little bit later. Right now, we're talking about Season 20. So Season 20 was when I started to become disillusioned with the show. I started to notice that the show could, in fact, be bad. I still defended it initially after I watched it, and I even said that it wasn't outright bad, it was just bad compared to the rest of South Park. I can honestly say I think it was bad. It's not timeless, because The thing is, South Park, despite the fact that it goes on current events, I think a lot of the older seasons can be fairly timeless. Even if you don't understand what current event they're mocking, the episodes can still be fun. And that key difference happens to be in the approach to how they take the show. But again, we will get to that in due time. Don't you worry your pretty little Mexican head. But the reason that Season 20 put me off so much is, again, they went full-on serialization, which I was okay with, but it happened to be an election year. So every episode happened to be about the presidential election, the 2016 election to be specific. This was also during the time I was slowly becoming truly red-pilled, so seeing these episodes didn't really make me laugh as much because they were a lot of very bottom-of-the-barrel, lowbrow, not very funny, unoriginal Trump jokes that everybody was making. Not to mention, most of the season recycled the same jokes. Most of the jokes were either, haha, look at Trump, or haha, look, member berries. Ooh, I member. Isn't nostalgia childish? And oh, look, internet trolls. Privacy's important, but look, everyone's a piece of shit, and if your privacy's shared, everyone will be fucked. And it's like, okay, each of those elements are fine, even if I disagree with their assessment of Trump, because obviously I do. Each of those elements are fine. But the problem is, you drag it out for 10 episodes and repeat it incessantly throughout the entire season, and it gets so fucking boring and washed out, and you're hearing this everywhere on the news, in other shows, like, all of it is the same fucking jokes. Like, everything is like, oh, look, Trump's bad, Orange Man bad. Like, that's all it was. That's all you heard about during 2016. And so for South Park to devolve simply into that, even when they said they didn't want it to, and that's why they chose Garrison to be Trump instead, because they said they didn't want to dignify him by putting him on their show, they still incessantly just focused and focused and focused on that. And due to the way the show is made, they severely fucked up because they made the wrong prediction about who would win, and had to completely rewrite the second half of the season, making one of the episodes have to be completely reworked in a way that didn't make any fucking sense, because all of the plot was clearly written for a Hillary victory. They just sort of changed some of the dialogue to make it make more sense, but even then it didn't make any fucking sense. That episode in question is OGs, which I think is the halfway point. I honestly don't even fucking remember the order of Season 20. All of it blends together. I just consider it one long episode, because it's literally just a 10-parter. And that's also part of the problem. It's literally just a 10-parter. If it was just like 2 episodes, and like it had all that shit, I wouldn't have complained. It was fine. Like I said, they do an election thing every cycle, or at least they have for a while. But the way they just did it for a whole season made it really fucking boring. Then out came Season 21, which was a slight improvement. In fact, it was considerably better than Season 20, but it wasn't anywhere near as good as Seasons 1 through 17. Probably better than Season 18, because Season 18 is really forgettable, and Season 21 has a few moments here and there that I really like. But overall, Season 21 is also kind of forgettable. It's better than Season 20, but it's not as good as the classic seasons. However, Season 22 was a vast improvement over Season 21, actually having a couple of episodes I really like, even though I completely disagree with the political message. That being the 2-parter with Man Bear Pig. Basically, they were saying that climate change is real, and they were basically apologizing for it. I don't agree with the message they're going for there, because I think that they had it right the first time with the original Man Bear Pig. But nevertheless, despite the fact that I disagreed with the political message, I really enjoyed the episodes. Man Bear Pig versus Satan was a really good fight. I really liked them bringing back Al Gore and still railing on him, even though they were supposed to be apologizing to him. He was just such a big narcissist in the episode, they made him out to be a jerk and made him impossible to like, even if they thought he was right in this instance. Season 22 would also introduce Tegrity Farms at the end, which we'll get to a little more in Season 23, but spoiler alert, I fucking hate Tegrity Farms. It is one of the worst plot arcs of South Park. And it's still fucking going. But yeah, Season 22, massively better than Season 21, and I overall really enjoyed it. Then we got Season 23, which was the last season that I actually liked. Season 23 was the end of the era for South Park for me. It was the last time I really truly loved the show. Now, Season 23 was fairly hit or miss. It had Tegrity Farms be a really big plot point, and it's really fucking lame, and it ruins Randy as a character, because it just turns him into, oh, look, I sell weed, and that's all he is now. There's nothing else to the character anymore. He's just a weed farmer and a stoner. That's it. That's his entire character now, is weed. Weed defines Randy now. which really pisses me off because I fucking love Randy. Randy is such a good character. But Tegrity Farms said, oh, you like Randy? Well, you're gonna love weed. It's really fucking lame, and I hate it, because stoner humor is, like, very lame to me. I don't like stoner humor. It's the bottom of the barrel. It's very easy to make fucking stoners laugh. And overall, stoners just annoy me and piss me off. There are a couple of stoner comedies I like. I like the Harold and Kumar series, and I like Dude, Where's My Car? But overall, stoners piss me off, and turning Randy into just that really ruined the character, which sucks because he was one of my favorite characters. However, despite that, Season 23 did have 2 really good episodes that stuck with me. Like I said, the overall season was a mixed bag, but there's 2 episodes that stood out and showed me that they still had balls, even though later seasons would show me that they don't. That being Banned in China, which ridiculed the Chinese government, Xi Jinping, and the concentration camps they have in China. It literally got the show banned in China. Such a good episode, and it showed that they had cojones to actually stand up to a corrupt regime. But I guess China's a safe enough corrupt regime to stand up to. I don't know. It's very weird that they were willing to do that with how much they toe the line now. But that wasn't even the ballsiest one. The ballsiest episode in Season 23 was Bored Girls, which the entire episode is ridiculing the concept of transgenders competing in sports. It has Macho Man Randy Savage becoming a quote-unquote female athlete and completely destroying all of the women because obviously. So Bored Girls was the last truly great South Park episode, I think, because then the season ended on the Amazon 2-parter with Bike Parade, and what was the other one? Fulfillment something? I don't even fucking remember, but the other one, the ending was Bike Parade, and it was really fucking lame. But yeah, Season 23 overall mixed bag, but I was still hopeful for the show. Then we got Season 24. Season 24 is 2 episodes, and they're each an hour long. Those episodes being the Pandemic Special and the Vaccination Special. Both are COVID-focused episodes. That's fine, South Park does current events and all that, and in all honesty, between the 2 there are actually some jokes I really liked. Like, for instance, in the Pandemic Special, when they shoot Token, they say if he dies, they would mark it as a COVID death. That was really funny. I would say that the Vaccination Special was worse, but it still didn't completely put me off the show. It did. It is what killed it for me, but it wasn't just that on its own. What it was not, like, right after the Vaccination Special, the next thing they did was the post-COVID specials. So I was like, it's in the span of a few years here now, and you've released 4 episodes, 2 of which you don't even count as real episodes, even though they're the same length as the other ones. You just released them on a different app and called them movies because you're fucking cheapskates. But second off, it's just COVID now. It's the COVID show. That was my thoughts. And that really soured me on it, and got me to reevaluate the show and start to realize that South Park lost its teeth quite a while ago. And I realized that Season 18 and on, really? And even to an extent Season 17, I would say, but Season 18 and on is really when I think the show actually got bad. So that's the South Park I've seen, right? I stopped watching before the post-COVID specials. The Vaccination Special killed it, and then the post-COVID specials put the final nail in the coffin. I was willing to give it another chance, but then Matt Stone and Trey Parker went and did an interview with the Colorado governor. And that's when I realized that these guys are establishment shills. They're total fucking normies. They're really out of touch. And that sucks. For people making a show like South Park to be out of touch, the show's gonna be bad. Especially with the increased focus on politics and current events that the show has taken. And that brings me to the next point I want to make. One of the biggest problems I have with modern South Park, and I've brought this up in previous videos before, is the over-focus on current events and politics. Now, you might be saying, well, South Park's always had current events and politics. Yes. Yes, it has. But, and this is a big but, it never was the focus. Now, hear me out. Originally, the approach to the show, when they started implementing current events and politics a little bit more in depth and making it more of a focus, early on, what they started to do was the approach that I feel they would take is they would say, this thing's going on in the world. How would this affect our characters? And so the focus was still on the characters themselves while keeping the satire going. And that was when South Park was at its peak. That was great. Not to mention, they were much more willing to take risks and offend anybody, whereas now they're very one-sided, toe the party line, and regurgitate generic, basic bitch normie Democrat talking points while also claiming to be Republican for some reason, which is really weird. But they're very establishment, and they're, like I said, they're out of touch. And that interview with the Colorado governor, where they talked in favor of, like, vaccine mandates, really put me off the show. Because South Park was always a show about making fun of authority, about personal freedom, about individualism. That was always the point in South Park. And yes, they made fun of both the right and the left, and they were usually fair with it. But I guess Trump derangement syndrome got the better of even them. Because I didn't mind when they were making fun of Trump originally. In fact, I was very anti-Trump in 2016 when that season came out. And I think that's part of why I wasn't as pissed off at it. Like, it doesn't piss me off because of the anti-Trump stuff. It pisses me off because it's badly written and it's not funny. And again, it plays it so safe, making the same unoriginal jokes that everyone else has already made about this subject. And another thing about South Park is it used to be, you know, cutting edge. It used to be like right when something was relevant, they'd make an episode on it. Now, whenever South Park does an episode on something, I've heard about it like 3 or 4 weeks before they did an episode on it. Hell, in some cases, even multiple months before. Especially with how few episodes they release a year now. But yeah, now they'll just throw out platitudes to both sides of the aisle and try to play the radical centrist view. And granted, they've always been like that. They've always been like, oh, my horseshoe theory and stuff, but they used to actually be saying something. Now they're just regurgitating the official story and, like, what you hear everyone else say. But the point I was getting at is, like I said, the way they used to approach it is, how will this affect our characters? Now I feel like the way they approach it is, oh, this thing's happening. How can we make an episode about that? How can we use our characters as a tool to make an episode about that? Before, the logos was, how will this affect our characters? Now the logos is, how can our characters represent this thing? It has gotten to the point where I honestly would prefer to watch modern-day Family Guy over modern-day South Park. And the thing is, Seth MacFarlane's much more openly leftist. He's just more willing to take risks and make good jokes. I've seen clips from modern Family Guy that actually still make me laugh. I'm sure, by and large, it's still pretty mediocre or outright terrible, but there are jokes that I see on YouTube all the time that are genuinely funny and still feel like Family Guy. Seth MacFarlane is still willing to be edgy and over the top. South Park likes to think it's edgy and over the top, but it's really not. It plays it as safe as possible while still having the illusion of being edgy. It sucks because they have plenty of characters to use as a vehicle for that. If that's the approach they want to take, they should just go all in and being edgy and offending everyone. PC Principal was a great character when he was introduced. I lost interest after a while, but he was one of the new characters I genuinely liked that was introduced in Season 19, because he was ridiculing the insanity of woke people now. But then they parrot narratives that those same woke people do. And this is after they did fucking Bored Girls, which was a genius episode that actually went after the issue of trans in sports. It's insane to me how inconsistent they are with that. And it's also insane to me just how fucking out of touch they are. Because, like I said, nowadays they'll make an episode and it's not even relevant anymore. They'll talk about something that everyone and their grandmothers already talked about. Maybe these newer seasons are better. Maybe they are. But I'm just so unwilling to watch South Park now when there's much better things I could do with my time now. Beavis and Butthead is so much better than South Park now. The current iteration of Beavis and Butthead is just as good as the original. It is on par. Beavis and Butthead has never had a bad episode. I say that, but then, maybe one day it will. But at the time I'm recording this, Beavis and Butthead is still an amazing show that has not had a bad episode. It may have had some subpar ones that are forgettable, but it has never outright lost touch with what it is. Beavis and Butthead is still timeless, whereas South Park now is just kind of boring, out-of-touch, generic stuff that you hear everybody else already talk about. I feel like I'd get the same effect watching South Park as I would watching someone who watched CNN and then recapped it with a bunch of jokes. That's what I feel like I would get with modern South Park. Again, I'm sure there's some people that would think, oh, you're just salty because they attacked what you believe in. No! Like I said, there's multiple episodes that I disagree with the message of that I still love. One of them being the return of Man Bear Pig. I can't remember what those episodes are called at this point, because again, I stopped being a walking encyclopedia of it when I lost interest. Part of what makes this so sad, though, is that South Park was once my favorite show. It was once something I was super obsessed with. I wanted to own every piece of media ever made of it. I wanted it to be a big part of my life. It was a big part of my life. I've done tons of YouTube videos on it. I've eaten 20-year-old cheesy poofs. Or maybe 30 they were really old. They were like 20 or 30 years old when I ate them. And they were awful. They tasted like wax. And those boxes of cheesy poofs were also not cheap. Like, they weren't like the most expensive thing in the world, but they weren't cheap either. especially for, like, expired food. I bought so many South Park DVDs. I bought obscure stuff, like the unaired version of Cartman Gets an Anal Probe. I got that fake Comic-Con exclusive version of 200 and 201 that's uncensored. Like I said, it's a bootleg, but I do own the episodes officially, too. And I bought that bootleg after that because, like, I remember I was told it was real by someone online. It was Ethan Blair, and then I bought it, and then I'm like, nah, Ethan, look, it's clearly a bootleg. And I figured it was, too, when he told me about it. But I bought it to prove a point because I'm petty like that. But it is a way to have the episode uncensored because the DVDs have the episode bleeped out. But an episode like 200 and 201 would never fucking happen now. There's no way in hell they'd be willing to do an episode about the Prophet Muhammad again. Never would happen in a million years. They're fucking pussies now. And now, even the Cartoon Wars two-parter is banned from streaming apps. That's how fucking cucked they are on showing their uncensored content. And maybe that's not them per se. That's their contracts with Comedy Central. That's Comedy Central doing it maybe, or Hulu, or whatever. I don't know. Oh, it's not on Hulu anymore. It's on HBO Max now. That's right. It's HBO Max. Whatever. Point still stands. Part of me thinks that Trey and Matt don't actually care about the show anymore. Now it's just a paycheck. It's just what they've been doing for so long, so then they just shit something out to meet their contractual arrangements. I think that's all it is now. And I think they're willing to just keep milking that cash cow and lazily regurgitate current events until it's no longer profitable. I think that's all they do. At this point, they're not passionate about the show anymore. Back when they were passionate about the show, it was good. And that's why it's so fucking sad, because South Park was such a big part of my life. Growing up with it, sneakily watching it, being allowed to watch it eventually, buying all those DVDs, watching it on Hulu, watching it on South Park Studios, playing online Flash games, playing the actual released video games. Another thing I did, which I didn't bring up earlier that I forgot to, was my friend who lived down the street, he was a neighbor, not really a friend, but he was a neighbor that I hung out with a little bit. He had a demo disc that had the South Park first-person shooter PS1 game on it. I would go to his house and play that. He just had the demo, but eventually I would play the full game. And that was fun. It's not the greatest game, but it's fun. I've played all the South Park games, even the bad ones. I love Chef's Love Shack. It's not great, but I fucking love it. Like, I love trivia, I love South Park, I love fun little mini-games. It's great. But now, I don't know if I'd ever be interested in buying another South Park-related thing. I heard they're making another game, and I loved the last two games. The Stick of Truth and the Fractured But Whole were both amazing. But I honestly don't know if I'm going to bother with the next one. It just hasn't really piqued my interest to get anything into it. And again, that's just fucking sad to me, because South Park was a huge part of my life. But I think you get the point. I've rambled on for quite a while now. I hope you guys can understand why my interest in South Park has waned so much. I'll still probably do more South Park videos. Once I get, like, the Blu-rays, I'll still do discs in depth for the other seasons, and things like that. And I'm still going to do red-eye theaters of the classic South Park episodes. But new South Park, it just ain't doing it for me. And I'm sorry to say that, and that might disappoint some of you, but I just can't sit through it. It's fucking dull. But I hope you've enjoyed this explanation, this big, long, overanalyzing episode. This has been Fugitive Red-Eye. Have a good one. Toodles!
That sucked. I'm sure glad that's over with.